Lorraine, why don't Homo sapiens show separate ancestry from gorillas? Well, I would argue that they do. If I screen share here and go to my presentation, I put together a visual here that shows, well, you can even see the Y chromosome visual too, that shows all of the massive differences in the Y chromosomes. Humans and chimpanzees, for example, you look at overall architecture, size differences, and gene content, and it's only about 35% the same. The human and gorilla Y are more similar to each other than the either are to the chimpanzee Y. Okay, so we do have separate ancestry. We can discover what's related, what's not, including fossil data. I've got it right here. We've got humans. Okay, you can look at a lot of genetic data, linkage block data. How come there's not more shuffling in the genome if we've evolved for millions of years, or just specifically go back to the out of Africa 100 to 200,000 years ago? Every generation you have recombination, gene conversion. How come we still have so many large linkage blocks? Why hasn't there, even with hot spots and cold spots, there should still be more scrambling? The genomes of humans should be more scrambling. It only looks like there's been about 4,500 years of recombination, of genomic shuffling. Okay, we've got orphan genes, these taxonomically restricted and essential genes. They don't form any consistent hierarchy. But what's interesting is what I have here in terms of the separate ancestry model actually matches almost perfectly what we see in the conventional literature. This is a visual showing the great ape Y chromosomes. Of course, they have humans in the great apes, right? Taxonomically, they view, so kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, they view humans, Homo sapiens, as being a human ape, human great ape. Then you got chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and the orangutans as non-human great apes. Well, you actually just look at the Y chromosomes. Okay, I think uniparentally inherited DNA is really good in determining or answering this question of ancestry, even more so than biparentally inherited nuclear DNA, autosomal DNA. Okay, there's no recombination, maybe a little bit at the ends, the tips in the Y chromosomes, but again, they're just inherited on one side. Y chromosome father side, mitochondrial DNA mother side. And so notice the human Y chromosome. Okay, I'm going to be going through Erica's video that she put out recently, but I didn't see no sophisticated mathematical model presented. I see a lot of guesswork. So for example, I see a lot of storytelling. I noticed even in her comment section of the video that there were some evolutionists, at least one, and I should go back and screenshot some, that were not all that impressed. Like even they recognize that there's just a lot of storytelling or a lot of guesswork in the papers being referenced. Okay, because remember, we don't actually have this so-called ancestor going back 6 million years ago, right? They got humans and chimpanzees and bonobos being related. They go back to this common ancestor 6 million years ago. What did this genome look like? Because this is the lineages today. This is the chimpanzee Y. Here's the human Y. Notice the heterochromatin, these densely packed pieces of DNA here, comprising satellite DNA repetitive sequences. It's basically non-existent in the chimpanzee line. So when was all this lost? When, how, where, why? Like I want to see a mathematical model. I want to see a sophisticated model. We haven't seen that yet. And so we don't have the genome of this common ancestor. So the evolutionary community has to assume that this common ancestor had similar genetics, right? And then since the split, these lineages changed. So there were chromosomal rearrangements, loss of chromatin, the addition of genes, the loss of genes. No, we just see a lot of imagination, a lot of storytelling. I want to see a very detailed model as to how these changes happened, when they happened, in what creatures or lineages they happened in. We don't see that. We don't find that. It's wishful thinking. What we have is the raw data here. Okay. And so human Y chromosome here, it's half the size. I want to know when all of this was lost. When did it become half the size? In light of the sperm competition that Erica does point out, that's legit. Okay, that's valid. This can explain, if you notice the bonobo and chimpanzee, it's not like there's a massive difference in architecture, gene content. It's still pretty similar. But once you bring in the human Y, there's drastic, massive changes you have to explain. Chimpanzees and bonobos can go back 4,500 years to a common ancestor archetype, and you can explain those differences, okay, from a creationist model. But if you want an evolutionary model where you're going to bring in humans 6 million years ago, now we really have to have some answers to these changes. Again, the heterochromatin, was all that just lost? We understand this heterochromatin is important. It's functional. And so when you bring in the gorilla Y, here's the thing. If you refute or overturn the idea that humans and chimpanzees are related, then obviously humans and gorillas aren't related. Or are you going to say that humans are more closely related to gorillas than chimpanzees? No, I don't think the evolutionist is going to go that route. So once you stay as close to home as possible and refute the idea or concept that humans and chimpanzees go back to a common ancestor, then you refute the idea that humans and any other form of life are related. If humans and chimpanzees aren't related based on the data and the evidence, then humans and strawberries or humans and mosquitoes are definitely not related. And that includes gorillas and orangutans. Okay. And so the thing is, the orangutan species, they're close enough where they can go back to an archetype. We can explain those. The gorilla, it can be its own. Okay. Because you're going to have extinct creatures as well. You could have species or variations come about after the flood and then go extinct as well, where we don't have them living today. Okay, so today we have living gorilla. And so they're their own kind. And bonobos and chimpanzees go back to their archetype. But humans are just so different to the chimpanzee and the bonobo species here, okay, that the only real valid conclusion is that they are unrelated. I also went into an entire presentation at Kent's boot camp on the amazing evidence for Adam and Eve, the biblical Adam and Eve. And I went through the Eve consensus sequence data that's published by Young Earth Creationists in the conventional literature and discussed how we have Eve's sequence. We know her sequence. And on average, any person only differs by the consensus sequence by a few nucleotides. And then when it comes to the most, because the average is only between 20 and 25, maybe 30 max. And then the most, you've got, I think, about 140 in some deeper lineages. And your highest and your average can be accounted for in a creationist time frame. Okay, but if evolution is true, why is there such little variation? Why is there so few DNA differences? That's a challenge that the evolutionists have not sufficiently engaged or answered. Okay. And Mr. Anderson strikes again. Are you thinking of maybe doing a debate with Erica on this topic of the human Y chromosome versus the great ape Y chromosome? Yeah, I'd probably do that. That would be fun. He says he'd watch that. You know, it's been a while since I've had a formal debate with Erica. I do appreciate her engagement, her videos. I think Brian and we finished recently a series responding to her chromosome 2 fusion stuff in junk DNA, but he wants to work together and refute her latest, or at least interact with her latest video on transitional fossils and homology. So I think we'll be doing that. I did 3 formal debates with Gutsy Gibbon going back years now. So we are probably getting to the point where there should be a rematch. Might be even more exciting than the new Avengers movies coming out. So Andrew Cummings says, so orangutans, chimps, and gorillas aren't the same ape kind then? No, I've been arguing for a while that you've got your human kind, you've got your gorilla kind, your chimpanzees and bonobos, I would argue based on the data, are related and go back to an archetype. And then your orangutan species most likely go back to their own archetype as well. And as far as I can see so far, the differences that we see in the ones that are related can be explained in a sophisticated manner in 4,500 years. The challenge to the evolutionary community, though, is how can they explain the differences? Because they want to bring in humans now. They want to bring in humans and say that these are all related. Well, they have a bigger challenge because now they have to explain all of those massive changes, rearrangements, and losses in both the human and chimpanzee lineages. And that's a much harder task. Okay. So anyways, let's look through here a bit, and I think we'll start winding it down as we're coming at the 2-hour mark. And this has been fun. Got a good chat. Some of my favorite peeps here. So Andrew Cummings says, interesting, that creates some other problems then. Well, I'd like to see what those problems are, and maybe we can interact with them and discuss them. Because here's the thing. Humans were, from the biblical model and starting point where we make predictions, retrodictions, humans were created as two, but animals were created in bulk. And so we're expecting a lot more diversity. So yeah, it's not a surprise that we see. That's why a lot of what we see in the biological world other than humans has to be taken as a case-to-case basis in a way, okay, where it's not just a one-size-fits rule. What I mean by that is, okay, humans and chimpanzees may have less diversity between themselves than lions and tigers and domesticated cats and leopards and so on and so forth. But here's the thing. Yeah, as creationists, we would agree probably for the most part. Again, when it comes to ancestry and declaring relationship, we don't want to be too dogmatic, okay? Because there are a lot of unknowns. There's still a lot of genetic sequencing that needs to be done in these creatures, okay? So yeah, we could say probably confidently that lions, tigers, jaguars, leopards, domesticated cats go back to an archetype. Okay. Now they have more diversity though between them than humans and chimps. But then we don't say as creationists that humans and chimpanzees are related. But again, chimpanzees do fall into the animal category. They do fall into the category of creatures that we would expect have more diversity. Okay. Because God created animals in bulk. So they're going to start off with more diversity. And yet we have a matching prediction of that, or confirmation, because we see overall in the biological world, animals do have more levels of genetic diversity, where humans started off as two. And so they're going to have lower levels of genetic diversity. So yeah, we're going to see some differences there. We're going to have some things to consider as we do our bare monological analyses, whether it's through fossil data, where we want to look at discontinuities and continuities, or genetic data, where we also want to look at discontinuities and continuities, like the discontinuity we see in Y chromosome, or the discontinuity we see in mitochondrial DNA, or what we observe in orphan genes, linkage blocks, differences in the way similar genes between humans and chimps are expressed or regulated, or epigenetic differences, or alternative splicing differences, or differences in the 3D arrangement of these genomes. Okay. Excellent question, Mr. Anderson. Why would animals have higher levels of diversity when they all went down to 2 and we went down to 6? See, here's the thing. At creation, you have animals created in bulk. Okay. You have more diversity, a lot more genes floating around these populations of tens of thousands to maybe millions strong. Hard to know exactly how many. You have a lot more genes floating around those populations than you do in humans. Humans are God creates 2, that restricts genetic diversity. And with the evolutionary model, think about it. You got Australopithecine-like ancestors evolving into Homo habilis, evolving into Homo erectus, who lives on the globe for 1 million plus years. Now, it's important to know that mutations add diversity because they're adding something that was not previously there. So every generation for millions of years, you have all these mutations accumulating. And so you'd expect humans today to have more levels of diversity that they do have, if evolution is true. Okay. But no, we have low levels of diversity, matching the position that says we started off as 2, and that restricts levels of genetic diversity. Now, you have at creation a 1 generation bottleneck at creation. Well, that's followed up with what? Rapid and exponential population growth. Adam and Eve have kids, their kids have kids, and you can expect a lot of the same with animals, except you have more different creatures having kids because it's not just two that you start off with. And so they're filling up the globe really fast. Then 2,000 years, you have another single generation bottleneck. Okay. Single generation bottleneck with the archetypes. You got, 2 of some, 7 or 14, depending. We can discuss that and debate that. Okay. But there is a bottleneck. So the number is drastically reduced. We can, for sake of argument, we can assume that the most heterozygous animals were brought on board the ark. But here's the thing, is this is a one generation bottleneck again, followed up by rapid and exponential population growth, where creatures move out, they start having kids, they start multiplying quickly. Okay, where humans, they don't spread out to all parts of the globe. And so maybe they exist between 10,000 and 100,000 at the Tower of Babel, maybe 400 years later. Okay, so they still have not spread out to all parts of the globe. God has to confuse the languages and force people to finally spread out to all parts of the globe. And animals have already done so. And so since it was a one generation bottleneck, they would have retained more levels of genetic heterozygosity, more levels of genetic diversity, since it wasn't a prolonged bottleneck like the evolutionary model has in the out of Africa story, okay, which is a prolonged bottleneck where you have a lot of inbreeding, you have a lot of genetic diversity being destroyed. But the creation model is different. You have 2 bottlenecks and another one at the Tower of Babel, but these are all short-lived. One generation, they're followed by rapid and exponential population growth. So these animals spreading out, reproducing quickly, retaining more levels of heterozygosity, they're going to create more diversity because they started off with more diversity at creation and at the ark, and now as they move to all parts of the globe. Okay, and so that's why animals today can still have high levels of diversity, higher levels of diversity, although there are some exceptions, but the exception doesn't overturn the rule, and humans still having lower level of genetic diversity. Okay, so, and speaking of that, that's why we have the CO1 gene, that highly conserved mitochondrial DNA protein that has low diversity across the entire biological kingdom. And that's why the researchers of that study, Rockefeller study, the genetic boundaries study, concluded that all species must have originated at about the same time. Now, we wouldn't say that's a creation event. We're saying that those are the species that have come about after the ark, after Noah's flood, over the last 4,500 years from those ark archetypes. Okay, creation would be 2,000 years before that. So, yeah, they're going to decrease in heterozygosity because of the bottleneck. But because it's a single generation bottleneck followed up with rapid and exponential population growth, they're going to retain a lot of that heterozygosity. Okay, and because they're multiplying fast, they're spreading out, they're adding more genetic diversity to their population than humans are. So we would still expect the same thing that we would at creation, that humans are going to have lower levels of genetic diversity than animals. And that's what we find.